So this may be your first dual cross-country flight, in which case we want to go over some of the things you should think about for your planning. Now I realize you have gone over this with your instructor prior to this, but it's important to kind of review and get ready for your flight. So we're planning to go to McMinnville. One of the things you want to make sure you do is gather all of your flight planning resources. That means your charts, and they have to be current, an iPad if you're using it, your POH, and of course your notepad for taking weather information, a computer if you're going to use that to gather your weather information, your E6B and so forth. What we want to do is get the big picture of your flight first. That's really important. Sometimes we get way too much into the weeds and we forget the big picture. So we're going to take a look at that. We're going to look at the airspace around the flight that we're taking, and after that, that would be when we would go ahead and get our route, weather briefing, and NOTAMs. Remember, you should take a look and assess yourself, your pilot, the aircraft, the environment, and pressure. So how many days has it been since your flight? How familiar are you with the aircraft? What are your personal minimums? Is this a long flight? Are you going to be fatigued at the end of the day after a day of work? Are you familiar with the topography of the flight? And are there any time constraints that mean that you might have to get back late? It would cause a problem and you'd have a pressure. So our route, what we're going to do for this first flight is we're actually going to use the VOR system of navigation. So we're going from Creswell to the Eugene VOR to the Corvallis VOR, and using the Corvallis VOR up past Independence to McMinnville. Our return flight, which we will not go through on this video, will be back to Albany and then to Creswell. So make sure you have current sectionals. The reason we want to do that is that you need to have something in case your iPad, if you're using an iPad, fails. So you need to be able to also learn how to use those charts. Someday, if you want to throw them out and use just one iPad, you're welcome to do that, but during your private pilot and sport pilot training, you're going to be using some sectionals. So for this particular recording, I'm using SkyVector because some of you do not use Forflight or haven't migrated to the iPad and Forflight yet. What I've got here is a screen display of SkyVector, which you can go to skyvector.com. And we can see I'm just going to plan the flight in the big picture. I just want to see what I'm looking at for the route of flight. So we're going to go from Hobby Field to the Eugene VOR, and in this case we're going to choose the VOR, not the Eugene Airport. And then we're going to go up to Corvallis using the Victor Airway 481, and I'm going to select the Corvallis VOR since our flight plan is going to McMinnville via VOR. And on the way from Corvallis to McMinnville, we're going to choose Independence as a waypoint, and then on up to McMinnville. So that gives me a good route plan, and I'm looking at the big picture. I want to see airports surrounding my flight path. I want to see topographic features around the flight path and airspace. So we can see Salem here is a Class D airspace. I can see the Willamette River makes this big U shape. That will be handy for our route to look for as a waypoint or as a topographic feature that will help us identify the Independence Airport as well. I can see the VOR radials here, and I can see all of the communication boxes as well. So these are things you want to look for and get in your mind as well as on your nav log for the proposed flight. What I suggest you do on a first cross-country dual flight is get to know the airport you're going to first, and then backward plan a little bit to the airport you know the most about, which of course would be our home base, Creswell. So take a look here at McMinnville. A couple of unique and informational boxes here. The one I'm pointing to is the McMinnville Remote Communications Outlet. This is how you would contact the flight service station in the air on 122.45. That's important should you need to open or close flight plan in the air or update your information on weather while you're flying to McMinnville. And you have to be fairly close to McMinnville to contact them. All right, and then we have our box for the McMinnville Airport. We can see that it has an automated surface observation system on 135.675. The elevation of the airport is 163 feet. It has a lighted runway at night, but it's pilot controlled with a little star. We see its longest runway is 5,400 feet, and the common traffic advisory frequency is 123.0. So we've got a lot of information there. We also see that there may be glider operations there. When we click on the information here, SkyVector has a nice way of doing this. They'll pull up the information sheet here, and it's a little bit out of the box, but it actually lists a lot of the details about the airport. And when you click over to the left, you can see the airport facility directory pops up. One of the things I always like to look for is there any details? Are there any details about a calm wind runway, or are there information I need to know about possible noise abatement, or, for example, what would I need to know about regarding their glider operations? And this should be able to be found in the airport facility directory. Okay, so we have also a good look at the runway environment here, and there is the longest runway. That's all very good. In addition, with SkyVector, you can get information on NOTAMs, which you might need to get as well on through your weather briefing. Okay, so that's one way to do it. So gathering all the information we can about the airport that we're going to. If you're planning this flight several days in advance, you may not have current NOTAMs. And of course, that means you're going to have to get a full briefing before the day of your flight, including winds aloft, NOTAMs, and any other weather information you can gather. A couple of things I also like to look at: the terrain around it. We can see that there is a road here. We can see that the actual city of McMinnville is to looks like the northwest of the airport. And I can see that there's a small city called Amity. So all these things are helpful because whether or not you're using VOR navigation or your GPS navigation, it's always important to have a situational awareness of where you are by looking out the window of the airplane. So these are things that will help you know where you are. And in the case of when we actually get ready to plan this flight, we will need a descent point to start our descent from 4,500 feet, which will be our cruise altitude in the direction we're going. So we'll need to have some either time or possibly a waypoint that we use to start our descent. Again, we're just kind of cruising around here, taking a look at our route of flight, and if there's anything we need to be aware of while we're in the air or what we see on the ground. Next, coming back to backward planning, I'm looking at the Corvallis Airport, and again, we can get information about Corvallis by clicking on the information, right-clicking here and getting information about Corvallis. I can readily see that there is a VOR at the Corvallis Airport, and the channel for that is 115.4. I know that there's a compass rose around the airport, which also is an indication that there's a VOR. And in terms of our route of flight, we're going to be using a radial off of the Corvallis VOR, and it should be about 352 degrees. So that's important. We'll need to know if that VOR is actually working on the day that we take the flight. Here is the information about the Corvallis Airport. Here's the AWOS. Here's the altitude, the length of the longest runway, and the CTAF. So these are things we want to note in our nav log as well. And it's important to note that oftentimes as you're going along your route, if you have a second radio, you can monitor and listen to the weather as you go along and get updated information on weather. You can get the current altimeter setting, barometric pressure, and so on, and winds, surface winds. Okay, and then we got back to Eugene. Most of us are aware of Eugene as Class D airspace, and we know for the most part what the frequencies are for that airport and our home base. So for those of you using Forflight, I've done a quick recording here of what it looks like planning with Forflight. As you can see, this is the entire route of flight that we're going to take to McMinnville. We're going to plan the return route a different way, and that will not be in this video. However, we can see the Forflight, there are lots of ways to get the information that we got same way out of very similarly to SkyVector. If I want to find details about the Corvallis airport, I just click on the Corvallis airport. I can get current weather, forecast weather, winds aloft, and other information and details. So it's all there in Forflight as well. And that's important, just again, to get familiar with your flight, get familiar with the area you're flying, and look for details that will help you along your route. In the next video, we'll cover using a navigation log both for the planning of your flight and in use during flight.